That morning at 9:47, my phone buzzed with a message from my son. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Stuck in a meeting. Love you. I was sitting alone at my corner booth when I glanced through the diner window across the street, and my chest stopped. He was right there, raising a champagne glass with his father-in-law, laughing like two men celebrating something I was never meant to know about. I started to rise, a hand pressed firmly on my shoulder from behind. Sit down. What hasn't begun yet is far worse. I'm so grateful to have you here with me today, to help me connect with everyone. Please comment below with the city or country you are watching from. Also, please note, this story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or settings is coincidental, but the message conveyed is vital. The coffee at Miller's Diner had always been too strong, but I never once complained. Sylvia used to say that was my greatest flaw, that I would sooner drink bad coffee in silence than speak up and ask for something better. She was probably right. She was right about most things. I had been coming to Miller's every Sunday morning for 11 years, ever since we moved to Millbrook from the city. Sylvia and I would take the corner booth by the window, the one that looked out across Main Street toward the old hardware store, and the row of shops that had been there since before either of us was born. She would order black coffee and a blueberry muffin. I would order black coffee and pretend I did not want half her muffin. She always pushed it toward me anyway. That Sunday, Father's Day, June 16th, 2024, I sat in that corner booth alone. The seat across from me was empty. It had been empty for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I was not counting. I just knew. The morning light came through the glass in long slanted lines cutting across the table, and I wrapped both hands around my mug, the way you do when you need something solid to hold on to. The diner hummed around me, the scrape of forks, the low murmur of the television behind the counter, showing the morning news, the smell of bacon grease and fresh brewed coffee that had soaked into the walls over decades. I had ordered the same thing I always ordered. I had sat in the same seat I always sat in. I was trying very hard to make Sunday morning feel like Sunday morning. At 9:47, my phone buzzed against the tabletop. I picked it up and looked at the screen. A text from Derek. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Stuck in a meeting with a business partner. Sorry I can't make it to breakfast this morning. I'll come by the house tonight and we'll celebrate properly. Love you. I read it twice. Then I smiled because that was what you did when your son sent you a message like that. Derek was a busy man. He worked hard. He had always worked hard even as a boy, stayed late after school to help his teachers stack chairs, shoveled the neighbor's driveway without being asked, saved his summer job money instead of spending it. Sylvia used to say he got that from me. I always thought he got it from her. I set the phone down and looked out the window. That was when I saw him. Meridian Grill sat directly across Main Street, a restaurant that had opened 3 years ago, all dark wood and low lighting, and a menu that charged $18 for a bowl of soup. Sylvia had called it pretentious. I had agreed. We had eaten there exactly once on our anniversary, and spent the entire meal quietly making fun of the portion sizes. It was one of my favorite memories. The front window of Meridian Grill faced Miller's Diner directly. During the day with the sun at the right angle, you could see straight through both sets of glass. Derek was sitting at a table near the window. He was not in a meeting. He was not stuck anywhere. He was leaning back in his chair with the loose, easy posture of a man who had nowhere else to be and knew it. His jacket draped over the back of the seat, a glass of champagne in his right hand. Champagne. Before 10 in the morning. Across the table from him sat Frank Donovan. I knew Frank well enough. He was Derek's father-in-law, Claire's father, a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s with silver hair. He kept carefully combed, and a handshake that was always a little too firm, like he was reminding you of something. He ran a property development company out of Poughkeepsie. Derek had introduced us at the wedding 4 years ago, and Frank had clapped me on the back and said, "Harold, you've got a fine son. We're going to do great things together." And I had smiled and nodded and felt, for reasons I could not explain, vaguely unsettled. Now Frank was laughing at something Derek had said. A big open laugh, head thrown back, the kind that meant the joke was not really funny, but the mood was good enough that it did not matter. Derek raised his champagne glass. Frank raised his. They clinked. The sound would not have carried across the street and through two sets of glass, but I felt it anyway, somewhere behind my sternum. I looked down at my phone. The screen was still lit. Derek's message still glowing on the surface. Stuck in a meeting with a business partner. I looked back across the street. Derek was gesturing now, both hands moving, drawing something in the air between them, the way he did when he was explaining a plan he was excited about. Frank was nodding, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. Two men who had already agreed on something, and were now simply enjoying the fact of their agreement. My coffee had gone cold. I did not notice until I lifted the mug, and the temperature of it surprised me cool and slightly bitter against my lips. I set it back down. 11 years of Sunday mornings in this booth. Sylvia across from me. The same muffin. The same bad coffee. The same view out the window of a street that never changed very much, and that was exactly what we loved about it. I picked my phone back up and read Derek's message one more time. Love you. 2 words that had never once required any effort for me to believe. Not in 33 years of watching him grow from a red-faced, screaming infant in a hospital delivery room, a grown man with his own life and his own choices. I had believed him without question, the way you believe in the walls of your own house, not because you check them every day, but because they have never given you any reason not to. Across the street, Derek laughed again. Frank said something and pointed at the window of Meridian Grill. Not at me, not at anything specific, just gesturing outward. And Derek turned slightly in his chair, and for one terrible half-second, I thought he was going to look directly at me. He did not. His eyes slid past Miller's Diner without stopping. I set my coffee down and pushed back from the booth. 30 feet of sidewalk and 2 lanes of traffic stood between me and that window. I could be at their table in under 2 minutes. I could walk through that door and stand in front of my son and ask him in front of Frank Donovan and every other person in that restaurant exactly what the two of them were celebrating on Father's Day morning, while his text message told me he was stuck in a meeting. I was halfway to standing when a hand came down firmly on my shoulder from behind. I turned. The woman sitting in the booth directly behind mine was looking at me with dark, steady eyes I had not seen in nearly 20 years. She was perhaps 50, with her hair cut short, and a quiet authority in the way she held herself that I recognized before I recognized her face. Carol Simmons. We had gone to Millbrook High together, class of 1977. The last time I had seen her was at Sylvia's funeral 2 years ago, where she had pressed my hand at the graveside and said, "If you ever need anything." I had not called. She was not holding a coffee cup. She was holding a badge folded flat against her palm, so only I could see it. Detective Millbrook, PD. "Harold," she said, her voice low and even. "Sit back down." "Carol, that's my son over there. He told me he was at a—" "I know what he told you." She kept her hand on my shoulder, steady and firm. "I've been watching them for 20 minutes. I came in here for coffee, and I recognized Derek the moment he sat down." She glanced once toward Meridian Grill, then back at me. "Frank Donovan has been on our radar for 3 months, financial irregularities connected to a property deal in Dutchess County. This morning I followed him here. I did not expect to see Derek with him." Her jaw tightened. If you walk over there right now emotional without knowing what you're actually dealing with, you will lose any chance of understanding what is really happening. And Harold, she paused, what hasn't started yet is much worse than what you are looking at. I looked back through the window. Derek was still laughing. Frank was leaning forward, his elbows on the white tablecloth, nodding at something my son had just said. I sat back down. Tell me what you know, I said. Carol pulled a card from her jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. Not here. Go home. Look through everything, his things, his papers, anything he's left at the house. Document what you find, and then call me. She held my gaze. But Harold, do not confront him. Not yet. Not until you know what you have. By the time I looked back across the street, Derek was already standing, pulling his wallet from his jacket. Frank was straightening his tie. I picked up Carol's card and held it without looking at it. Whatever my son was celebrating across that street, he did not know I had been watching. He did not know Carol Simmons had been watching. And he did not know that the moment he walked out of Meridian Grill and drove away, I was going to go home and begin looking for the thing Carol had just told me was worse. I drove home from Miller's Diner the long way, so I took Route 44 out past the old orchard on the edge of town, where the apple trees were just beginning to show their summer growth. And I drove slowly with the windows down and the warm June air coming through, and I told myself there was probably a reasonable explanation. Derek had 2 meetings scheduled for that morning, and the first one finished early. Or Frank had called at the last minute, and Derek had not wanted to cancel. Or it was a surprise of some kind, something they were planning together for my benefit. Something that required champagne and laughter, and a table at Millbrook's most overpriced restaurant. By the time I pulled into the driveway on Birchwood Lane, I had almost convinced myself. Almost. The house looked the same as it always did, white clapboard siding, black shutters, the rose bushes along the front porch that Sylvia had planted the second summer we lived here, and that I had kept alive through 11 winters through sheer stubbornness and a significant amount of fertilizer. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, looking at those roses. She had chosen a variety called New Dawn, pale pink, almost white in certain light. She said they reminded her of early mornings. I went inside and made a fresh pot of coffee I did not want, and sat at the kitchen table and waited. Derek arrived at 6:23. I heard his key in the front door. I had given him a copy years ago, back when Sylvia first got sick, and we thought it made sense for him to be able to come and go, and then his voice calling from the hallway, warm and easy the way it always was. Dad. You home. Kitchen, I said. He came in carrying 2 paper bags from Rosario's, the Italian place on Church Street that we had been ordering from since Derek was in high school. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the room immediately. He set the bags on the counter and turned to me with a grin that reached all the way to his eyes, and I looked at my son, really looked at him, and felt something pull tight in the center of my chest. He was 41 years old. He had Sylvia's jaw and my eyes and a way of filling a room that had always made people gravitate toward him. He was by every measure I had ever applied a good man. My son. The boy I had coached through Little League and driven to SAT prep and watched walk across a stage to collect his college diploma while Sylvia gripped my arm so hard she left marks. Happy Father's Day, old man, he said, and clapped me on the shoulder. Sorry about this morning. The meeting ran long. No trouble, I said. I kept myself busy. He moved to the stove to heat the food, talking as he went something about a property deal in Poughkeepsie, something about Claire's sister visiting next month, something about whether I had watched the Yankees game the night before. I answered in the right places. I asked the right questions. I was performing a version of myself that was so close to the real thing that I was not sure in that moment which one I was. His leather briefcase sat on the chair beside the kitchen doorway, where he had dropped it coming in. It was not latched all the way. I noticed it the way you notice something you were not looking for peripherally, almost accidentally, the way your eye catches movement at the edge of a room. The top flap was not fully closed, and from beneath the flap, the corner of a document was visible. White paper, heavy stock, the kind used for legal filings. Derek was standing with his back to me, stirring sauce in a pan. I crossed the kitchen, quietly reached the briefcase, and lifted the flap with 2 fingers. The document on top was thick, 15, maybe 20 pages, held together with a black binder clip. The header read in clean block letters, "Durable Power of Attorney, State of New York." My name was on the first line. Harold James Webb, identified as the principal, the person granting authority. Derek's name was on the second line. Derek Michael Webb, identified as the agent, the person receiving authority. I understood in a general way what a durable power of attorney was. It was a legal document that allowed one person to make financial and legal decisions on behalf of another. Doctors sometimes recommended them for aging parents. Sylvia and I had discussed drawing one up for each other years ago and never gotten around to it. The document in my hands covered, according to the scope section on page 2, all real property transactions, all banking and investment accounts, and all contract execution on behalf of the principal. All of it. Everything I owned. Signed over to Derek to do with as he saw fit. At the bottom of the signature page, 2 lines waited. One was already filled, Derek's signature dated 2 weeks ago. The other was blank. My line. Beneath the POA, held against the inside of the briefcase by nothing more than the pressure of the flap, was a single piece of notepaper. Handwritten. Derek's handwriting. I would have known it anywhere, had watched it develop from a child's uneven scrawl into the quick, slanted print he used now. It read, "Frank POA, done this week. House signs, Friday. Don't tell Claire." I read it twice. The sauce was still bubbling on the stove. Derek was still talking something about the Yankees bullpen, something about a pitcher whose name I did not register. I placed the document back exactly as I had found it, closed the briefcase flap, returned to my chair at the kitchen table, picked up my coffee mug. My hands did not shake. I made sure of that. "You want garlic bread?" Derek called over his shoulder. "Sure," I said. "That sounds great." We ate dinner at the kitchen table the way we had done 100 times before. Plates of penny garlic bread on a paper towel. The small television on the counter turned to the evening news. Derek talked. I listened. I laughed at the right moments and refilled his water glass when it got low, and told him the food was delicious, which it was. When he left at 8:45, he hugged me at the door and said, "Love you, Dad. I'll call you this week." "Love you too," I said. "Drive safe." I stood on the porch and watched his taillights disappear down Birchwood Lane. Then I went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and looked at his briefcase. He had forgotten it. Or he had left it on purpose. I did not yet know which possibility frightened me more. But I knew what I was going to do. Derek kept his laptop at my house most weeks. The machine, he said, was too bulky to carry back and forth, the one he used when he stayed over. It was sitting on the desk in the spare room, right where he always left it. I knew his password. I had watched him type it a dozen times without ever meaning to look. The spare bedroom was at the end of the hall, past the linen closet, and the framed photographs Sylvia had arranged on the wall, the year we moved in, our wedding portrait. Derek, at age 7, missing his 2 front teeth, a snapshot of the 3 of us at Niagara Falls that a stranger had taken, and that had come out slightly blurred, but that Sylvia loved anyway, because she said the blurring made it look like a painting. I stopped in front of that photograph for a moment. Derek was sitting on my shoulders in the picture, both arms raised above his head, like he had just won something. Sylvia was laughing at something off camera. I was looking at her instead of the lens. I went into the spare room and sat down at the desk. Derek's laptop was where it always was closed, centered on the desk, the charging cable plugged into the wall socket to the right. A silver machine, slightly scuffed on the corner where he had dropped it once. I had watched him type his password so many times over the years that I knew it the way I knew the combination to my own lockbox, not because I had ever tried to memorize it, but because repetition does that to a person. The mind holds things whether you ask it to or not. It was Sylvia's birthday, September 14th, 1959, 9141959. I opened the laptop. The screen came to life. I typed the numbers. The desktop appeared. I sat there for a moment, without moving my hands in my lap, looking at the screen. There was a part of me, a stubborn, hopeful part, that had survived 65 years of being Harold Webb, that was still expecting to find nothing. A calendar full of contractor meetings, spreadsheets about lumber costs, ordinary things that would allow me to close the laptop and go to bed and wake up tomorrow with my son still intact. I clicked on the email icon. The inbox loaded. I scrolled slowly, reading subject lines. Most of them were exactly what I would have expected. Supplier quotes project timelines, a thread about a zoning permit in Dutchess County. Normal, reasonable, the digital paperwork of a man who built things for a living. Then I saw it. The subject line read, Re-Web Asset Timeline Revised. The sender was listed as F. Donovan. The date was April 3rd, 2024. I clicked. The email chain opened a thread of messages going back 4 months, Frank's name at the top of each one, Derek's replies below. I started at the beginning. March 15th. Frank to Derek. Derek had the Birchwood Lane property assessed independently. Current market value sits at 1.38 million, conservative estimate, given Hudson Valley appreciation trends. Combined with the life insurance payout your mother left Harold, $800,000, confirmed with Arthur Blake's office last fall, total liquid and fixed assets come to approximately $2.2 million. Once you have the POA executed, we can initiate transfer within 48 hours. Your share moves to the Cayman account as discussed. Keep the visits consistent. He trusts you completely. I read it again. Then a third time. 1.38 million. That was the house on Birchwood Lane. The house where Derek had learned to ride a bike in the driveway. The house where Sylvia had planted roses that bloomed every June without fail. The house I had paid off over 30 years of early mornings and long days and every dollar I could set aside from a teacher's salary because I wanted more than almost anything to give my family something permanent. $800,000. That was the life insurance. The money Sylvia had insisted on keeping current even in the lean years, even when I said we could not afford the premiums. She had looked at me across the kitchen table and said, Harold, that money is for you after I'm gone. Promise me you'll keep it. I had promised. I had kept it. It was sitting in a savings account at Hudson Valley Credit Union, and I had not touched a cent of it because touching it felt like using her up. I scrolled down. March 22nd. Derek to Frank. The old man trusts me completely. Has since Mom died. He's been lonely. I think that actually makes this easier. I just need to keep showing up. Couple more weeks and we'll have everything lined up. The old man. I had to stop reading for a moment. I put both palms flat on the desk and breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth the way the cardiologist had told me to do when my blood pressure ran high. The room was very quiet. Down the hall, the photographs were still on the wall, Derek at 7 arms raised, grinning his gap-toothed grin. April 3rd. Frank to Derek. Timeline looks good? Remind me, has he mentioned Arthur Blake recently? Blake drew up Sylvia's estate documents, and there may be instruments we don't know about. Worth knowing before we proceed. Also, the buyer in Poughkeepsie is getting impatient. I told them mid-July. Make sure your father is in the right state of mind to sign by then. Whatever it takes to keep him calm and compliant. Whatever it takes to keep him calm and compliant. I scrolled to the most recent message, April 19th. Derek to Frank. Blake hasn't come up. I don't think Dad's spoken to him since the estate settled. He's been having some health issues, dizziness, fatigue, some memory stuff. Doctor thinks it's stress. Works in our favor, honestly. He's more dependent than ever. I give it 3 weeks before he signs anything I put in front of him. Dizziness, fatigue, memory stuff. I pushed back from the desk and stood up. My legs felt strange, not quite steady, as if the floor had shifted slightly beneath me. 3 months of waking up in the morning, feeling like something was wrong with my body. 3 months of doctors telling me I was grieving and overworked. 3 months of my son sitting across from me at this kitchen table, handing me food and drinks and telling me he was worried about me. I walked to the window and looked out at Birchwood Lane. The street was empty orange under the glow of the streetlights. Derek's taillights were long gone. He had written those words, "The old man trusts me completely," and then driven to my house and eaten dinner with me and hugged me at the door and said he loved me. I believed him every time. I went back to the desk and forwarded the entire email chain to my personal account. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked back down the hall. I stopped again in front of the photographs on the wall. The blurred snapshot from Niagara Falls. Sylvia laughing at something off camera. She had always been smarter than me about people. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I said very quietly to no one in particular, "Sylvia, I think I'm in trouble." The house gave no answer. But somewhere in the back of my mind, quiet as a breath, something stirred, a half-memory of a name she had mentioned once a long time ago. A lawyer she trusted. Someone she had called an old friend. I could not pull the name to the surface. Not yet. But I knew where to look. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, and the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, and Derek's words cycling through my mind, the way a song does when you cannot shake it loose. The old man trusts me completely. He's been lonely. Works in our favor. I gave it 3 weeks before he signs anything I put in front of him. At some point, the darkness outside the window began to soften, going from black to the deep blue that comes just before dawn, and I watched it change without moving. Sylvia used to love that hour. She called it the honest hour because she said it was the only time of day when the world was not pretending to be anything other than what it was, just sky and silence and the slow return of light. I heard Derek's car at 6:41. The sound of his engine in the driveway, the slightly rough idle he kept meaning to get fixed, was so familiar that under any other circumstances it would have been a comfort. I heard his key in the front door. Heard his footsteps moving toward the kitchen, the refrigerator opening. The particular clank of the glass pitcher. We kept the orange juice in the one with the small chip on the handle that I had never gotten around to replacing. I got up slowly, moving without sound, and positioned myself in the hallway outside the kitchen door. The door was not fully closed. Through the gap, 3, maybe 4 inches, I could see the counter, the stove, and the left side of the kitchen, where Derek was standing with his back to me. He was wearing a gray jacket over a dark shirt, dressed for a workday. His posture relaxed in the way of a man performing a routine so practiced it required no thought. He pulled 2 glasses from the cabinet, poured orange juice into both from the pitcher. Set one glass aside, mine, I understood, placed slightly to the left, closest to where I always sat. Then he reached into the right pocket of his jacket. What he removed was small. A glass vial, no larger than a travel-sized bottle of hand lotion, with no label on it. Clear glass, clear liquid inside. He uncapped it with his thumb, tilted it over my glass. I counted. 1 drop. 2. 3. He recapped the vial, returned it to his jacket pocket, and picked up a spoon from the drying rack. He stirred my glass in 4 slow circles, the spoon clicking softly against the side, and set it back in its position to the left. 15 seconds. The whole thing took 15 seconds, and he did it with the same unhurried ease with which a person adds creamer to their morning coffee. I stepped back from the door and pressed my spine against the hallway wall. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in the backs of my knees. 3 months. I had been waking up every morning feeling wrong dizzy before I was fully upright, exhausted, before the day had started, standing in the middle of a room sometimes, and genuinely unable to remember why I had walked into it. 2 different doctors. Blood panels and EKG, a referral to a neurologist I had not yet seen. Stress, they said. Grief. The body processing loss in its own time. My son had been poisoning me. I did not let myself stand still with that thought. If I stood still with it, I would walk into that kitchen and say things that could not be unsaid, and whatever chance I had of understanding the full scope of what Derek and Frank were doing would evaporate the moment they knew I was aware. I breathed in, breathed out, rolled my shoulders back the way my old football coach used to tell us to do before a game. Then I walked into the kitchen. "Morning," Derek said, turning with a smile. "Didn't hear you get up. You sleep okay?" "Not great," I said, which was true. Back was bothering me. "You should call Dr. Haynes about that." He handed me the orange juice. His fingers were steady. His eyes were steady. Everything about him was steady. "Here. I squeezed fresh this morning." He had not squeezed it fresh. It was from the same pitcher we always kept in the refrigerator. But I took the glass from his hand and said, "Thank you, son," and raised it toward my lips. The smell hit me first citrus, and something else beneath it, faint and chemical, the kind of scent that does not belong in a kitchen. I let the rim of the glass touch my bottom lip without drinking, and then lowered it and set it on the counter beside me. "Actually," I said, "I think I'll wait until after I eat something. Juice on an empty stomach has been giving me trouble lately." Derek nodded. "Makes sense. I'll scramble some eggs." I watched him move to the refrigerator. The moment his back was fully turned, I reached into the cabinet beside the stove and closed my hand around the small mason jar I used for storing leftover sauce. I poured the orange juice into it carefully, every drop, and screwed the lid on tight. I slid the jar into the deep pocket of my robe and replaced my empty glass on the counter. By the time Derek turned back around with the egg carton in his hand, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my hands folded in front of me, and what I hoped was a reasonable approximation of a tired old man waiting for breakfast. "You want toast too, so?" he asked. "Please," I said. We ate together at the kitchen table, Derek talking about a renovation project in Rhinebeck. Me asking questions I already did not care about the answers to. I ate the eggs. I drank the coffee he poured from the pot, the regular pot, the one he had not touched before I came into the kitchen. I watched his hands the entire time without appearing to watch them. When he left at 8:15, he squeezed my shoulder at the door and said, "I'll check in tonight." "Okay, you're looking a little pale." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." After his car pulled out of the driveway, I stood at the kitchen sink and gripped the edge of the counter with both hands and let myself feel for exactly 30 seconds the full weight of what I now knew. My son. My boy. The gap-toothed kid in the photograph at Niagara Falls. Then I opened the cabinet under the sink, found a paper bag, placed the mason jar inside, and carried it to the spare bedroom, where I set it on the desk beside the laptop. I needed a laboratory. I needed a doctor who would ask no questions until I was ready to answer them. And before any of that, I needed to find the name that had been circling the edges of my memory since last night. Sylvia had left me something. I did not yet know what. But I knew with a certainty I could not explain that she had. I looked at the door at the end of the hall. Her room. I had not opened it in 2 years, 3 months, and 12 days. Today I decided was the day. I had not driven myself anywhere in 11 weeks. That was how long it had been since I had felt steady enough behind the wheel to trust myself on the road, since the dizziness had gotten bad enough that I started leaving my car in the driveway and asking Derek to take me to appointments to the grocery store, to the pharmacy, to pick up the prescriptions that were not helping, because they were treating the wrong thing entirely. 11 weeks of handing over that small piece of independence without understanding why I was losing it. On the morning of June 21st, I backed the Buick out of the garage and drove to Poughkeepsie without telling anyone. The morning was clear, the kind of early summer morning that makes the Hudson Valley look like something painted rather than real. The hills green and heavy with foliage, the river catching the light in flat silver panels between the trees. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and the mason jar wrapped in a dish towel on the passenger seat beside me, and for the first time in nearly 3 months, I did not feel dizzy. My hands were steady. My vision was clear. The road stayed where it was supposed to be. That more than anything told me what I already suspected. Hudson Valley Medical Lab was on South Hamilton Street, a low brick building set back from the road, with a small parking lot and a sign in the window advertising walk-in services. I had found it by searching for independent toxicology testing, not the hospital lab, not any facility Derek might have a connection to. Somewhere clean and separate and mine. The woman at the front desk directed me to a consultation room, and 10 minutes later, Dr. Patricia Owens came through the door. She was perhaps 50, with short gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular manner of someone who had spent decades delivering difficult information with precision and without drama. She shook my hand, sat down across from me, and looked at the mason jar I had placed on the table between us. "You said on the intake form that you wanted a comprehensive toxicology panel on a beverage sample," she said. "Can you tell me more about where this came from?" "My son prepared it for me," I said. 4 mornings ago. I watched him add something to it from an unlabeled vial before he brought it to me. I did not drink it." Dr. Owens looked at me steadily. "And you've been experiencing symptoms for 3 months. Dizziness, fatigue, short-term memory lapses. 2 physicians told me it was stress-related grief response. I stopped consuming anything my son prepared 4 days ago. The symptoms have largely resolved." She nodded once the way people do when a picture comes into focus. "I'll run a full panel. We screened for over 200 compounds, prescription medications, controlled substances, common household toxins, agricultural chemicals. Results take 72 hours. She paused. "I want to make sure you understand, if we find something, this report becomes a legal document. Our lab is CLIA certified, which means our testing methodology meets federal standards for clinical accuracy. Results from this facility are admissible in a court of law in New York State." "I understand," I said. "That's why I came here and not somewhere else." She studied me for a moment. "Are you safe at home, Mr. Webb?" The question landed quietly, but it had weight to it. I thought about the house on Birchwood Lane, Derek's key on the hook by the door, the mason jars of orange juice I had been carefully disposing of each morning since the 17th, pouring them down the bathroom sink while the shower ran to cover the sound. "For now," I said. "He doesn't know I know. Keep it that way until you have documentation," she said. "If this comes back positive for what I think you may be describing, you'll need that advantage." The results came back on the morning of June 25th, 4 days after I had submitted the sample, and Dr. Owens called me herself rather than leaving a message. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I need you to come in." I was back in her office by 10 o'clock. She slid a printed report across the desk. The page was dense with chemical nomenclature and concentration measurements, but she had highlighted one line in yellow near the top of the compound summary. Digoxin. Confirmed present. Concentration 0.8 nanograms per milliliter. Digoxin is a cardiac glycoside, Dr. Owens said, leaning forward with her hands folded. It's derived from the foxglove plant and has legitimate medical uses. It's prescribed to regulate heart rhythm in patients with certain arrhythmias and heart failure. In those patients, it's carefully dosed and monitored because the therapeutic window is very narrow. Too little, and it does nothing. Too much, and it becomes toxic. And at this concentration, I asked, at 0.8 nanograms per milliliter in a single beverage sample, and administered repeatedly over a period of months, you would expect exactly what you've been experiencing: chronic dizziness, persistent fatigue, short-term memory disruption, difficulty with concentration, and spatial orientation. She removed her glasses and set them on the desk. There's something else you need to understand, Mr. Webb. At low doses, prolonged digoxin exposure does not typically show up on standard blood panels unless a physician specifically orders a digoxin level test, which your doctors would have had no reason to do if they believed they were treating a stress response. That is not an accident. Someone who chose this particular compound understood that. The room was very quiet. Whoever administered this to you, she continued, was not trying to cause acute poisoning. They were trying to reduce a sustained state of cognitive and physical impairment, something that would present to outside observers and medical professionals alike as the natural decline of a grieving elderly man. She held my gaze. This is deliberate, Mr. Webb, and it has been going on for some time. I looked down at the highlighted line on the report. Digoxin. Confirmed present. 3 months of mornings. 3 months of my son handing me a glass and watching me drink it and asking me how I was feeling. 3 months of me telling him I was fine, just tired, just getting older, just missing his mother. What are my options? I asked. Legally, this report constitutes documentation of poisoning. Under New York penal law, administering a substance to another person without their knowledge or consent, with intent to cause physical impairment, is a felony assault in the second degree, at minimum potentially higher, depending on circumstances and intent. She slid a business card across the desk. I would recommend you contact an attorney before you contact law enforcement. You want someone to help you structure what you bring to the police so that it lands correctly. I picked up the report, folded it once, placed it in the inside pocket of my jacket close against my chest, the way you carry something you cannot afford to lose. Thank you, Dr. Owens, I said. Be careful, she said. People who do this kind of thing carefully, they don't stop easily. I drove home the long way back through the hills above the river. The report folded against my chest, and the name I still could not quite remember turning slowly in the back of my mind, like a key looking for its lock. The door to Sylvia's room was the third on the right, past the linen closet, and the photographs on the wall at the end of the hallway, where the floorboards creaked slightly if you stepped too close to the left side. I had learned over 31 years of marriage to step right. Some mornings in the first weeks after she died, I would walk down that hallway without thinking and instinctively shift my weight to avoid the creak, and then stop and stand there in the dim light, feeling the full absurdity of a man who had memorized the architecture of a life that no longer existed. I had not opened her door since the morning of March 5th, 2022. I stood in front of it now on the afternoon of June 22nd and put my hand on the knob. The brass was cool, I turned it. The smell reached me before anything else. Chanel, number 5, faint but unmistakable, the way a perfume clings to fabric and wood long after the person who wore it has gone. Sylvia had used the same fragrance for 40 years. She bought it once a year in November at the Macy's in Poughkeepsie, and she applied it every morning with 2 light touches, one to each wrist, and never more than that. She said excess was for people who were not sure of themselves. I stood in the doorway and breathed her in. The room was as she had left it. I had asked Carmen, our neighbor, to clean it once a month, and Carmen had done exactly that, kept the surfaces dusted, the windows cracked in summer, to prevent mustiness, the bedspread smooth and centered. But nothing had been moved. Sylvia's reading glasses were still on the nightstand, folded closed beside the water glass she had rinsed and set there on her last good morning. Her cardigan, the blue one with the wooden buttons she had ordered from a catalog in Vermont, was draped over the back of the chair by the window, exactly as she had left it, one sleeve hanging lower than the other. I crossed the room slowly and sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress remembered her weight differently than mine. I had noticed that the first time I sat here after she died, the way the springs gave slightly to the left, toward her side, as if the bed itself had not yet accepted that she was not coming back. I sat there for a long moment with my hands on my knees, looking at nothing in particular, letting the room settle around me. Then I looked up at the wall above the dresser. Sylvia had painted it herself, a landscape Hudson Valley. In autumn, the hills above the river, going gold and amber, a farmhouse in the middle distance with smoke rising from the chimney. She had taken a watercolor class at the community center in Rhinebeck, the year Derek started high school, when she said she needed something that was entirely hers, and she had painted that landscape the following spring and hung it herself with a level and 2 anchor bolts, and the focused attention she brought to everything she considered worth doing correctly. The painting was hanging slightly to the left. I noticed it the way you notice a wrong note in a familiar song, not immediately, but with a delayed certainty, the brain catching up to what the eye has already registered. Sylvia had leveled that painting herself. She had checked it 3 times. I had watched her do it. I stood up and crossed to the dresser. Up close, the tilt was a subtle, perhaps half an inch, no more. The kind of thing a stranger would never notice. But I had looked at that painting across the breakfast tray I brought her on Sunday mornings for the last 2 years of her life, and I knew exactly where it sat on that wall, the way I knew the sound of her breathing in the dark. I lifted it carefully from the hooks. Behind it, set into the plaster, was a shallow recess, not a proper hiding place, just a gap where the wall anchor had pulled slightly away from the lath over the years, leaving a space perhaps 4 inches wide and 2 inches deep. In that space, folded once lengthwise and held flat by the weight of the painting, was a brown leather journal and a plain white envelope with my name written on the front. Harold, her handwriting. The particular way she looped the H and made the A small and round and careful. My hands were shaking now. I sat back down on the bed with the journal in my lap and the envelope beside me, and I opened the journal to the last written pages. The entries were dated. The final cluster began in October of 2021, 8 months before she died. October 19th. Her handwriting was slightly unsteady, the way it had become in her last year when the medication made her hands unreliable. But the words were precise. Harold does not see it yet. He loves Derek too completely to look at him clearly, and I understand that because I love him the same way. But love is not the same as trust, and I have been watching our son's eyes when he looks at this house, and I know the difference between a man who sees a home and a man who sees an asset. Derek sees an asset. I pray I am wrong. I do not believe I am. November 3rd. Spoke with Arthur Blake today. Told him everything. He will hold what I give him until it is needed. Harold will resist this. He will call it paranoia, call it the illness making me fearful, and maybe he will be right. But I would rather be wrong, and have left him nothing, than be right, and have left him defenseless. November 27th. If you are reading this, Harold James Webb, it means I was not wrong. And it means you are scared and angry and probably furious at me for not telling you while I was alive to explain. I am sorry for that. But you would have argued with me, and I did not have the energy left for arguments. I had just enough energy left to make sure you would not be alone when this happened. Arthur Blake. Market Street, Millbrook. He has everything. Go see him. Do not wait. And Harold, fight. Not for the house, not for the money. Fight because you are Harold Webb, and you have never in your life let anyone take something from you without your consent, and you are not going to start now. I love you. I have always loved you. That does not stop. I sat on her bed for a long time after that. I was not aware at first that I was crying. It was only when the words on the page began to blur that I understood what was happening, the hot, unfamiliar sensation on my face, the way my chest had gone tight, and then suddenly painfully loose like a fist unclenching after years of holding on. I cried the way men cry when they have held it for too long, not quietly, not with any dignity, but with the kind of force that comes from somewhere below the ribs. I pressed the journal against my chest and bent forward and let it happen there in her room with the smell of her perfume around me and her cardigan on the chair and her reading glasses on the nightstand, and I said her name out loud twice because I needed to hear it in the air. When it passed, I sat up straight and wiped my face with the back of my hand. Then I picked up the white envelope, held it for a moment, and placed it carefully in the inside pocket of my jacket, beside the lab report from Dr. Owens. Arthur Blake, Market Street, Millbrook. Tomorrow morning. First thing. Blake Estate Law occupied the second floor of a narrow brick building on Market Street, above a real estate office, and a dry cleaner that had been there according to the hand-lettered sign in its window since 1968. The staircase was steep, and the banister was polished smooth from decades of hands, and the door at the top had a frosted glass panel with the firm's name painted in gold letters that had begun to flake at the edges. I stood on the landing for a moment, my hand on the knob, the white envelope in my jacket pocket, and the lab report beside it. Then I knocked and went in. The receptionist, a young woman with a Vassar pennant tacked to her cubicle wall, looked up and said, "Mr. Webb." "That's right." "He's expecting you. Go on back." The office at the end of the hall was large by the standards of the building, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves along two walls and a window that looked out over Market Street and the green beyond it. The man behind the desk was already standing when I came through the door, 70 years old, perhaps with white hair cut close, and a face that had the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time listening carefully to people in difficult circumstances. He wore a dark suit that had seen better decades, but fit him with the dignity of something chosen rather than inherited. He came around the desk and shook my hand with both of his. "Harold," he said, "I'm Arthur Blake. I've been hoping you'd come for about 2 years now." His voice was the kind that did not need to be loud to carry. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. Not relief exactly, but the recognition of a person who already knew the weight of what I was carrying and was not going to pretend otherwise. "Sylvia told you I'd come eventually," I said. "She told me you'd come when you had no other choice." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Harold. There's a great deal to go over, and I want to make sure you understand all of it before we decide what to do next." I sat. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the desk, the way a man does when he has rehearsed this conversation many times in his own mind. "How long did you know her?" I asked. 31 years. She came to me in 1993, when you bought the house on Birchwood Lane and needed the title work done. We stayed in touch after that. She referred clients. I referred clients. We had lunch twice a year at the old inn on Route 9. She was the most clear-eyed person I have ever had as a client. He paused. She called me in November of 2021 and told me she had perhaps 6 months left and that she needed to make arrangements for a specific contingency. She said she did not want to alarm you unnecessarily. She said if she was wrong, the arrangements would simply sit dormant and cause no harm. But if she was right, I said. Arthur nodded slowly. Tell me what you have. I laid everything on his desk. The forwarded email chain printed at the library on Church Street. The toxicology report from Dr. Owens digoxin confirmed at 0.8 nanograms per milliliter. The photograph I had taken with my phone of the POA document in Derek's briefcase. The handwritten note, Frank POA, done this week, house signs, Friday, don't tell Claire. Arthur read each document without interrupting his expression, unchanging his eyes, moving steadily down each page. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me. This is enough, he said. Not for everything, not yet. But it is enough to activate what Sylvia left for you. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a document wallet, dark blue, with a label on the tab in Sylvia's handwriting. My name. He set it on the desk between us and opened it. Under New York Estates Powers and Trusts Law, he said, a person may establish a trust at any time during their life funded with their own assets, with conditions of their own choosing, governing when and how the trust may be accessed. Sylvia established what is called a supplemental trust, separate from the estate documents. Derek knows about, separate from probate, entirely outside the assets he has been calculating. The principal amount is $850,000 accumulated over 30 years from her own income, her inheritance from her mother, and investments she managed independently. He slid a certificate across the desk. The condition she attached was precise. The trust activates only upon documented evidence that someone is attempting to defraud you of your property or assets through coercion, forgery, or abuse of trust. I looked at the certificate. Sylvia Webb Family Trust, $850,000. She saved this, I said, for 30 years. She was very deliberate about it. Arthur's voice was quiet. She told me she hoped you would never need it. But she said, and I am quoting her directly because I wrote it down, Harold has given everything he has to this family his entire life. If someone tries to take what's left of it from him, I want him to have a fighting chance. My throat tightened. I pressed my lips together and looked at the window until I had myself under control. There is also this, Arthur said. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk, smaller than the one I had found behind the painting. My name on the front in the same careful handwriting. I opened it. The letter inside was a single page written in the slightly unsteady hand of her last months. Harold, if Arthur is giving you this, then I was right, and I am so sorry that I was right. I know you loved Derek with everything you had. I did too. That love was real, and it was good, and nothing that has happened since changes that. But love does not require you to be destroyed by the person you gave it to. You have Arthur. You have the trust. You have 35 years of being the most stubborn, most honorable man I have ever known. Use all of it. And when it is over, go to Montauk. We always said we would go. Go for both of us. I love you, Harold James Webb. I have loved you since the night we met at that terrible party in 1980, and you spilled red wine on my dress and apologized for 20 minutes. I will love you past every version of ending. Go fight. I folded the letter, placed it in my jacket pocket beside the lab report. Arthur was watching me with the careful attention of a man who knew when not to speak. After a moment, I said, "What do we do first?" He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "First, I file an emergency application with Dutchess County Court for a temporary restraining order on all transactions involving the Birchwood Lane property. That freezes any sale, any transfer, any mortgage action. Derek and Frank cannot move on the house while that order is in place." He tapped the documents. "Second, I activate the trust. You will have access to $850,000 within 72 hours. That gives you the resources to fight this properly." He paused. "Third, you need someone who can gather what we cannot. A private investigator. Someone who can follow Derek and Frank, document their meetings, find what we have not yet found." "Do you know someone?" I asked. "I know exactly the right person," he said. "His name is Pete Garza. He is discreet, he is thorough, and he has worked with this office before on cases involving estate fraud." Arthur picked up the phone. "I will call him now if you are ready." I looked at the letter in my jacket pocket. The lab report, Sylvia's certificate. "I'm ready," I said. Pete Garza was waiting for me in the last booth at the back of the Millbrook Diner on Franklin Avenue, nursing a cup of coffee and reading a folded newspaper, the way people did before phones made that habit obsolete. He was perhaps 52, 53, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a life spent mostly outdoors, or in circumstances that qualified as the opposite of comfortable. He wore a flannel shirt over a dark undershirt and work boots that had seen genuine work, and when he looked up as I approached, he had the unhurried, evaluating gaze of a man who had spent decades reading people quickly and accurately. He did not stand up. He folded his newspaper and extended his hand across the table. "Mr. Webb," he said. "Pete Garza. Arthur speaks well of you." "He speaks well of you too," I said, and slid into the booth across from him. The waitress came. I ordered coffee. Pete pushed the creamer toward me without being asked, which told me Arthur had mentioned I took it light. The small attentions of a man who prepared before he arrived. "Arthur gave me the broad strokes," Pete said. "I want to hear it from you. Everything in order without leaving anything out because you think it might not be relevant. The things people think are irrelevant are usually the things that matter most." So I told him. I started with Father's Day morning at Miller's Diner. Derek's text message, the champagne through the window, and I went through everything in sequence. The briefcase, the laptop, the orange juice, the mason jar, Dr. Owens and the digoxin, Sylvia's room and the painting and the journal, Arthur and the trust. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and Pete listened without interrupting, once his eyes steady on my face, his coffee going cold in front of him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. 3 months of digoxin, he said, and 2 physicians missed it. They were not looking for it, I said. Neither was I. Pete nodded slowly. The email chain Derek wrote that your health issues were working in their favor. That tells me the poisoning was not opportunistic. It was part of the plan from the beginning. Which means Frank Donovan designed this, not Derek. He looked at me steadily. Your son is not the architect here, Mr. Webb. He is the instrument. That does not make what he did forgivable, but it changes what we are dealing with. I had not allowed myself to think about it in those terms. The distinction did not make the betrayal smaller, but it rearranged something in the way I was carrying it. What do you need from me? I asked. 2 things. First, continue exactly as you have been. Derek comes to see you, you are tired and forgetful and grateful for his help. Do not change your behavior by a single degree. If he senses anything has shifted, Frank will accelerate the timeline, and we lose the advantage. Pete wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Second, do not dispose of anything. Every piece of evidence stays exactly where it is. The mason jar is with Dr. Owens already, which is correct. The email printouts, where are they? Locked in the filing cabinet in my study. The key is on a ring I keep on my person. Good. Keep them there. He pulled a small notebook from his shirt pocket and uncapped a pen. I am going to follow Derek and Frank for the next week. Public spaces, their vehicles, their known meeting locations. I am licensed by the state of New York under general business law. Everything I document in public is legally obtained and admissible. I will have a preliminary report for you by July 1st. The House is supposed to sign on Friday the 5th, I said. I know, Arthur told me. We have 9 days. He wrote something in the notebook without looking down. That is enough time if we move correctly. He asked me several more questions, Frank's business address in Poughkeepsie, the name of the real estate firm Derek used, whether I had noticed any new vehicles parked near the house on Birchwood Lane. I answered everything I could and told him honestly when I did not know. He wrote steadily, unhurried, and when he was satisfied, he capped the pen and looked at me. One more thing, he said. How are you holding up? The question surprised me. I had expected efficiency from Pete Garza. Arthur had described him as thorough and discreet, but not that. I am managing, I said. That is not what I asked. I looked at him across the table. Outside the window, Franklin Avenue went about its Tuesday morning business. A woman walking a golden retriever, a delivery truck idling in front of the hardware store, 2 teenagers on bicycles moving slowly through the intersection. Millbrook in June. The town I had chosen to spend the rest of my life in with Sylvia in the house on Birchwood Lane. I am angry, I said. Mostly I am angry, and underneath the anger I am something else that I do not have a word for yet. Pete nodded as if that was a complete and satisfactory answer. Hold on to the anger, he said. It will keep you sharp. Just do not let it make you move too fast. He left first, dropping a $10 bill on the table for both coffees without discussion. I sat for a few minutes after he was gone, looking at the empty booth across from me, and then I drove home. Derek arrived at 6:45 that evening. He brought groceries, a rotisserie chicken from the Price Chopper on Route 44, a container of coleslaw, a loaf of sourdough bread from the bakery on Maple Avenue. He moved around my kitchen with the ease of a man entirely comfortable in a space, pulling plates from the cabinet, finding the serving spoon in the 3rd drawer on the left without looking, pouring 2 glasses of water from the filtered pitcher on the counter. He did not bring orange juice. I noticed that and said nothing. We ate at the kitchen table. Derek talked about a permit delay on a project in Hyde Park, about Claire's plans to visit her college roommate in Boston, about whether the Yankees had any hope in the second half of the season. I ate my chicken and said the right things and asked the right questions and laughed at the right moments. At one point, he reached across and squeezed my forearm and said, "You seem a little better tonight, Dad, less worn down." I looked at my son's hand on my arm, the same hand that had held a vial over my glass 3 mornings ago, the same hand that had signed a power of attorney document transferring everything I owned. I had a good day, I said. Sometimes you just have a good day. He smiled satisfied and went back to his food. After he left at 9 o'clock, I locked the front door and stood in the hallway for a long moment, with my forehead resting against the cool wood of the doorframe. The house was very quiet around me. Through the window beside the door, I could see the last of the evening light fading over the rose bushes along the porch. Sylvia's new dawn roses, pale pink, going gray in the dusk. I straightened up, went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher Derek had not touched. 9 days. Pete Garza was already out there. Arthur Blake was filing paperwork in the morning, and I had just spent 3 hours sitting across from my son, eating rotisserie chicken and talking about baseball and he had no idea that anything in the world had changed. I was going to need to be very good at this for 9 more days. Pete called at 7:43 on the morning of June 30th and said 4 words before I had finished saying hello. "Come meet me. Now." His office was on Maple Avenue above the insurance agency in a suite that smelled of old coffee and printer toner and had a view of the parking lot behind the hardware store. I had been there once before to drop off copies of the email chain. This time Pete was standing when I came through the door, which he had not been at the diner, and that told me something before he said a word. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and sat down himself and opened a manila folder without preamble. 5 days, he said. Here is what 5 days looks like. He slid a photograph across the desk. Derek and Frank Donovan standing outside a glass-fronted office building in Poughkeepsie, both men in suits. Frank with his hand on Derek's shoulder, the posture of a man concluding something satisfactory. "That building," Pete said, tapping the photograph, "is the Dutchess County office of Meridian Property Group, real estate brokerage out of Manhattan, commercial and residential, significant Hudson Valley presence. Derek and Frank have been there 3 times in the past 5 days. I documented each visit times, durations, photographs." He slid a second document across. Thick paper densely printed with a Meridian Property Group letterhead at the top. "I have a contact at the county clerk's office," Pete said. "Meridian filed a purchase and sale agreement on the Birchwood Lane property 6 days ago. Standard residential transaction form. Buyer is a holding company registered in Delaware, which is common enough that it would not raise flags on its own." He paused. "The sale price is $1,380,000. The earnest money deposit, $200,000, was wired 3 days ago. It is sitting in Meridian's escrow account right now." I looked at the document. My address. Birchwood Lane, Millbrook, New York. The house Sylvia and I had bought 31 years ago for $212,000 and paid off over 3 decades of careful living. "The closing date," Pete said, "is Friday, July 5th, 5 days from today." I had known this was coming. The note in Derek's briefcase had said Friday. I had known since the night I read it. But seeing it printed on an official document, a real transaction, a real escrow account, a real buyer waiting, made my stomach drop in a way that knowing had not. "There is more," Pete said. He slid a third document across. This one was a copy of a signature page, the authorization line on the purchase and sale agreement, the line that confirmed the seller's consent to list the property. The signature on that line was mine, except it was not mine. I picked it up and held it close. Harold J. Webb, written in a hand that approximated my signature with enough accuracy that a stranger would not have questioned it, the same slant, the same compressed W, the same way the final B curled slightly downward. But I had not signed this document. I had never seen this document, and looking at it with my own eyes, knowing with absolute certainty that I had not produced that signature, I felt something shift in my chest, from grief into something colder and harder and considerably more dangerous. "Derek signed this," I said. "That is my conclusion as well," Pete said. "Under New York Penal Law Section 170.10, forgery in the second degree, signing another person's name on a written instrument with intent to defraud constitutes a Class D felony. But given the value of the property involved, a prosecutor could argue for forgery in the first degree under Section 170.15, which is a Class C felony carrying a maximum sentence of 15 years. He folded his hands on the desk. "Harold, your son, has been committing a felony. This is no longer a civil matter. This is criminal." I set the document down carefully on the desk. My hands were steady. I made them steady the same way I had been making them steady for 2 weeks, through the specific effort of will that becomes available to a person when they have already absorbed the worst of a thing and are now simply dealing with its dimensions. The buyer, I said. Do they know the signature is forged? Unknown. Possibly not. The forgery is competent, and they had no reason to verify it independently, which means they are potentially a victim as well, though that is for the lawyers and the courts to sort out. Pete leaned back. What matters right now is that Arthur's temporary restraining order, which he filed yesterday morning, will freeze this transaction before it reaches closing. The court has 48 hours to rule on an emergency TRO application of this type. Arthur expects the order by Wednesday, at the latest 3 days before the scheduled closing. I nodded slowly. 3 days. The machinery Arthur and Pete had set in motion was moving faster than Derek and Frank knew. The closing they had scheduled for Friday was going to hit a wall they had not anticipated, but I needed to see it. I thanked Pete, took copies of everything, and drove back through Millbrook toward home. And when I reached the intersection of Franklin Avenue and Birchwood Lane, instead of turning right toward the house, I turned left and drove past it slowly, with both hands on the wheel. The house looked exactly as it always had. White clapboard black shutters, the rose bushes along the front porch that needed deadheading. The flagstone path Sylvia and I had laid ourselves one October weekend 20 years ago, stone by stone, arguing cheerfully about the spacing. The Norway maple in the front yard that Derek had climbed as a boy and fallen out of at age 9 and cried about for 20 minutes, and then immediately climbed again. A buyer in Delaware had wired $200,000 for this house. My son had signed my name on a piece of paper to make that possible. I drove past slowly and did not stop and did not look away until the house disappeared in my rearview mirror. Then I drove to Arthur Blake's office on Market Street and went upstairs and knocked on the frosted glass door and told him everything Pete had found. Arthur listened with his hands folded and his expression unchanged until I finished. Then he said, "The TRO application is already in front of Judge Patricia Holloway at Dutchess County Supreme Court. I expect her ruling by Wednesday morning." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Harold, this is no longer just fraud. A forged signature on a real property transaction in New York State is a felony. When we bring this to law enforcement, Derek is not looking at a civil judgment. He is looking at criminal charges." "I know," I said. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the Norway maple, the flagstone path, 31 years of a life built stone by stone in a house on Birchwood Lane. "Yes," I said, "I am prepared for that." Pete called again at 9:15 the following morning, July 1st, and this time he did not tell me to come in. He told me to sit down first. I was already sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, but I understood what he meant. I set the mug down and said, "Go ahead." "I spent yesterday afternoon going through Frank Donovan's financial filings," Pete said. "Public Records County Clerk documents the state's LLC registration database. Frank has a development project, a residential subdivision he is calling Donovan Heights, planned for a parcel of land outside Rhinebeck. 42 units, estimated development cost of $22 million. "I know Frank is in real estate development," I said. "Derek mentioned it. What Derek did not mention," Pete said, "is how Frank is financing it." There was a pause. Outside my kitchen window, a pair of cardinals were working through the bird feeder Sylvia had hung from the maple branch 7 years ago, and that I had kept filled every week since she died, because she would have wanted me to. "Tell me," I said. "Frank approached a private investment fund, a New York-based group called Hargrove Capital Partners, 8 months ago for a bridge loan of $4 million to cover the initial land acquisition and permits for Donovan Heights. Bridge loans of that size require substantial collateral. Frank provided 3 properties as security for the loan." Pete paused again, and in that pause I felt the cold begin at the base of my spine. One of those three properties, Harold, is the house on Birchwood Lane. I did not say anything for a moment. He used my house, I said. He recorded a collateral lien against the Birchwood Lane property with Dutchess County 8 months ago. The lien is in the public record. It has your address, your tax parcel number, your property description. It does not have your signature because you never signed anything, but the lien was recorded anyway using a fraudulent authorization document that Frank's attorney prepared. Pete's voice was steady and careful. Harold, under New York lien law, placing an encumbrance on real property without the owner's knowledge or written consent is a felony fraudulent encumbrance of real estate. Frank Donovan has been committing a crime against your property for 8 months. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The Cardinals were still at the feeder, indifferent to everything. What does this mean practically? I asked. If the lien stands and Frank's development project runs into financial trouble, which Pete said is already showing signs of delay, Hargrove Capital Partners has a legal claim against your home as collateral security. They could move to foreclose on the lien to recover their investment. He let that settle. You are not just facing Derek trying to sell your house through a forged signature. You are facing Frank having already pledged your house as debt collateral to a third-party lender who has no idea the authorization was fraudulent. 2 directions. I had understood in the abstract that Frank was dangerous. I had understood that his involvement went beyond simply advising Derek on the mechanics of the POA. But this pledging a man's home to secure your own debts without his knowledge 8 months before the man even knew anything was wrong. This was the act of someone who had planned every contingency and trusted that Harold Webb would never be sharp enough to find it. Can it be undone? I asked. Yes, Pete said. Arthur needs to file what is called a quiet title action, a petition to the court, asking a judge to declare the lien invalid on the grounds of fraud. Given that there is no valid authorization document, given that your signature does not appear anywhere on the lien filing, and given the criminal nature of how the encumbrance was created, Arthur believes a judge will grant the petition. But it takes time. And it is one more thing that needs to happen before July 5th. I turned away from his window. Call Arthur, I said. Tell him everything you just told me. I will be at his office in an hour. Already called him, Pete said. He is expecting you at 10. I put the phone down on the kitchen table and stood there for a moment in the quiet of the house. The kitchen smelled of coffee and dish soap, and the faint ghost of something older, some combination of wood and plaster, and decades of meals cooked in this room that had soaked into the walls the way memories soak into a person. 31 years of this kitchen. 31 years of Sunday mornings and holiday dinners, and Derek sitting at this table doing homework while Sylvia cooked, and I read the newspaper, and the three of us occupied the same space with the easy, unconscious comfort of people who had nowhere else they needed to be. Frank Donovan had attached a debt to all of that 8 months ago the same way you attach a lien to a vacant lot, clinically, instrumentally, without a moment's consideration for what the property meant to the person it belonged to. I rinsed my coffee cup, dried it, placed it in the cabinet. Then I went to the spare bedroom and unlocked the filing cabinet and removed the folder that held my copies of everything, the email chain, the toxicology report, the photograph of the POA Pete's preliminary report with the forged signature documentation. I added Pete's new findings, which he had already emailed to my personal account. I held the folder in both hands for a moment, feeling its weight. 8 months ago, Frank Donovan had decided Harold Webb was finished. A lonely old man slowing down, losing his grip, easy to manage and easier to take from. He had designed a plan with multiple redundancies, the POA, the forged sale, the collateral lien, so that even if one piece failed, the others would carry it through. He had not designed a plan that accounted for Sylvia. He had not designed a plan that accounted for Arthur Blake or Pete Garza, or a mason jar of orange juice in a filing cabinet, or a painted landscape hanging slightly crooked on a bedroom wall. I put the folder under my arm and picked up my car keys. At Arthur's office an hour later, Pete was already there, sitting in the chair to my left with his notebook open. Arthur was behind his desk with his glasses on, and the phone records Pete had obtained spread across the blotter in front of him. Arthur looked up when I came in and said without greeting, "Frank Donovan is more exposed than he knows. The lien filing has his attorney's name on the authorization document. That attorney is going to have a very difficult conversation with the New York State Bar Association." I sat down, opened my folder, placed everything on Arthur's desk. "Tell me what we need," I said. Arthur picked up his pen. "We need one more thing, Harold. Something that connects Frank and Derek not just to fraud, but to intent, to a plan. Something recorded, something undeniable, something a jury can hear with their own ears." He looked at me steadily. "We need to hear them say it themselves." I looked at Pete. Pete looked back at me and said, "I know someone who can help you set up a camera." The camera was smaller than I expected. Pete's contact, a man named Vincent, who arrived at Birchwood Lane on the morning of July 2nd in an unmarked van and spoke no more than 30 words the entire time he was in the house, installed it inside the smoke detector housing in the living room ceiling. Digital recording, motion activated, synced to a cloud account, accessible only from my laptop. Vincent showed me how to access the footage, confirmed the audio pickup radius covered the entire main floor, and left. The whole process took 40 minutes. I had been checking the footage every evening since fast-forwarding through hours of empty rooms and the sound of the house settling in the July heat. Derek had visited on the afternoon of July 2nd. I watched myself move through my own living room with the slightly slowed gait I had been performing for weeks. Watched Derek follow me to the kitchen. Watched us eat lunch together at the table I had eaten 1,000 lunches at. Nothing. Ordinary domestic footage of a man and his son sharing a meal. On the evening of July 3rd, I sat down at my laptop at 9:45 after Derek had left, opened the cloud account, and began reviewing the afternoon's footage. I found it at the 2-hour and 17-minute mark. The timestamp read 3:12 p.m. I had been upstairs, ostensibly napping. Derek had encouraged me to rest, had settled me with a blanket and the ceiling fan on, had closed the bedroom door with the soft, practiced care of someone performing attentiveness. I had lain in the dark, listening to the silence of the house, until I heard faintly the sound of his voice downstairs. A one-sided conversation, a phone call. On the footage, Derek sat in the armchair by the window, my armchair, the one I had owned for 20 years, reupholstered once at Sylvia's insistence with his phone pressed to his ear and his body angled slightly away from the room, as if that offered some privacy. The camera's microphone picked up both sides of the conversation with a clarity that made my chest tighten even before I understood what I was hearing. Derek's voice first. "He still hasn't signed. I've been pushing as hard as I can without tipping him off. The man is... I don't know, Frank. He seems slower, more confused, but he keeps finding reasons to put it off." Frank Donovan's voice came through the phone speaker, slightly compressed, but unmistakable, that particular cadence I had heard across dinner tables and at Derek's wedding, and at 2 Christmas gatherings, the voice of a man accustomed to being the most certain person in any room. "Increase the dosage. Another month at the higher level and he won't be able to keep track of what he's signed and what he hasn't." "And if he still won't sign," Derek said. There was a pause. 4 seconds. I counted them. "Then we don't need him to sign," Frank said. "A man who is no longer competent or no longer present, the estate moves through a different channel. You understand what I'm telling you?" Derek's voice dropped. "I understand. The Hargrove deadline is September. We need this resolved before then. One way or the other. I pressed pause. The room around me was completely still. The laptop screen glowed in the dark of the spare bedroom. On it, frozen at the 3:14 p.m. timestamp, Derek sat in my armchair with the phone at his ear and the expression of a man who had just agreed to something he would spend the rest of his life unable to take back. A man who is no longer present. I pressed play again and listened to the exchange 2 more times. The way you listen to something you cannot believe you heard correctly. Each time Frank's voice said the same thing. Each time Derek said, "I understand." My son had just agreed in my living room in my armchair, in a house his mother had loved, to the possibility of my death. I pushed back from the desk and walked to the bathroom at the end of the hall and ran cold water over both wrists at the sink until my hands stopped shaking. It took longer than I expected. My reflection in the mirror above the sink looked older than I remembered the lines around my eyes, deeper the set of my jaw, harder impression behind my eyes that had not been there on Father's Day morning 3 weeks ago when I had sat in Miller's diner and drunk cold coffee and missed Sylvia and believed with the uncomplicated confidence of a man who had never been given real reason not to that my son loved me. I dried my hands, went back to the spare bedroom, sat down. I exported the audio file to 3 separate locations, my personal email account, a USB drive. I locked in the filing cabinet, and a second cloud account I had created under a name that was not mine. Then I opened a new document and typed out a verbatim transcript of the exchange, time-stamped and sourced, the way Arthur had told me to document everything. Under New York, Penal Law Section 105.15, I wrote from memory, conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree is a Class A felony. It requires an agreement between 2 or more persons to engage in conduct constituting murder and at least one overt act in furtherance of that agreement. Frank Donovan had proposed it. Derek Webb had agreed to it. The overt act, 3 months of digoxin in my morning orange juice, was already documented by Dr. Owens at Hudson Valley Medical Lab. This was no longer a fraud. This was no longer a forgery. This was a murder conspiracy recorded in my own living room on equipment, installed with my knowledge and consent, in a state where one-party recording was fully legal. I sat for a long time after that. Then I thought of Carol Simmons. Carol had been a detective with the Millbrook Police Department for 14 years. She and her husband Bill had lived 4 houses down on Birchwood Lane until Bill took a job in Albany, and they moved upstate, but she still worked out of the Millbrook PD, and she and Sylvia had been close book club Tuesday mornings, the kind of friendship built on shared coffee and honest conversation. I had not spoken to Carol since Sylvia's funeral, where she had held my hand at the graveside and said, "Harold, if you ever need anything." And I had said thank you and not called. I needed something now. I picked up my phone. It was 11:47 at night. I dialed anyway. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice alert in the way of someone trained to answer calls at any hour. "Harold Webb," she said, and there was warmth in it underneath the surprise. "It has been a long time." "I know," I said. "Carol, I need your help. Tonight if you can. I have something you need to hear." Carol Simmons arrived at Birchwood Lane at 12:20 in the morning, driving an unmarked sedan, dressed in jeans and a department jacket, with her badge clipped to the front pocket. I had left the porch light on and the front door open, and she came up the flagstone path the same way she had come dozens of times over the years, Sylvia's book club nights, neighborhood gatherings, the occasional Sunday dinner, except that this time she was not carrying a bottle of wine. She was exactly as I remembered. 51 years old, compact and precise in her movements, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of focused attention in her eyes that I associated with people who listened for a living. She shook my hand at the door and said, "Harold, you look like you haven't slept in 3 weeks." 2.5, I said. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table, and I played her the recording from my laptop. All of it. Derek's voice, Frank's voice, the 4-second pause before Frank said what he said. Derek's answer. Carol listened without moving her hands flat on the table, her eyes on the laptop screen. When it finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Play it again." I played it again. She listened with her eyes closed this time, the way musicians listen to something they are trying to memorize. When it ended the second time, she opened her eyes and looked at me across the table. "Harold, I have been a detective for 14 years. I have worked homicide. I have worked fraud. I have worked domestic violence cases that would keep you up at night. What I just heard is a conspiracy to commit murder. Frank Donovan proposed the death of another human being, and Derek Webb agreed to it. That recording, combined with the toxicology report you have from Hudson Valley Medical Lab, constitutes probable cause for arrest." "I know," I said, "but I need more than an arrest. I need a conviction. I need it to be airtight." Carol studied me for a moment. "Arthur Blake called me this afternoon, actually. Before you did. He told me about the TRO, the forged signature, the collateral lien. He said you were building something." She tilted her head slightly. "How much more do you have?" I laid everything on the kitchen table. The email chain, the toxicology report, Pete's photographs of Derek and Frank at Meridian Property Group, the forged signature documentation, the transcript I had typed from the recording. Carol went through each document methodically, making notes in a small pad she pulled from her jacket pocket, her handwriting quick and economical. When she finished, she sat back and crossed her arms. "This is one of the most complete packages of evidence I have seen come out of a private investigation. Pete Garza does good work." She tapped the recording transcript. "Here is what I need from you. I need you to continue the performance for 4 more days. Derek cannot know anything has changed. Frank cannot know. The TRO will hit them on Wednesday. The forgery charges will follow. And this recording gives me grounds for a criminal investigation that goes well beyond fraud." She looked at me steadily. "But Harold, you need to be somewhere with witnesses when this comes to a head. Somewhere public, somewhere documented, somewhere we control." "I have been thinking about that," I said. She nodded. "We'll talk more tomorrow. Get some sleep if you can." She left at 1:15. I did not sleep. At 7:48 the following morning, July 4th, Independence Day, a detail that struck me with a particular and private irony, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. The area code was local. The message read, "Harold, this is Claire, Derek's wife. I need to talk to you alone. Please don't tell Derek I contacted you. I know this is strange. I'm sorry. I just need someone to talk to." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm here. Where can we meet?" She chose a coffee shop in Rhinebeck, 40 minutes south on Route 9. I got there first and took a table near the back, away from the windows, and ordered coffee I did not intend to drink. Claire arrived 12 minutes later. I had met Claire Donovan perhaps 8 times over the 4 years she and Derek had been married. She was 34, with her father's coloring, silver fair, gray-eyed, and a quietness about her that I had always taken for reserve but now wondered if it was something else. She slid into the chair across from me and wrapped both hands around the coffee mug the server placed in front of her, and looked at me with eyes that were red at the edges and had clearly been that way for more than one night. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for reaching out," I said. "Claire, whatever you need to tell me, take your time. She exhaled slowly. 2 nights ago, I was at my parents' house. My dad's study door was partway open and I heard him on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. I was walking past. She pressed her lips together. I heard him say Derek's name. And I heard him talk about you not being around anymore. Not in a, it wasn't abstract. He was specific about it. He talked about the estate, about the timeline, about Derek being positioned correctly. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth and steadied herself. I have been telling myself for 2 years that Derek was helping you manage your finances. That was what he told me. That you were getting older and you needed help and he was being a good son. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because he is my husband and I love him and I did not want to know what I was starting to suspect. Her hands were shaking around the mug. I reached across the table and covered them with mine and felt the trembling in her fingers. You are not responsible for what they did, Claire, I said. She shook her head hard. My father has done this before. That is what I heard him say on the phone. He mentioned a family in Houston. 4 years ago. An elderly man, a property dispute, it was handled quietly. He said that like it was a business transaction. Like handling someone quietly was a thing a person just does. She looked up at me and her gray eyes were bright with tears she was not letting fall. I don't know who my father is. I thought I knew. I don't. I know, I said. And I did. The specific grief of discovering that a person you loved has been in some essential way someone other than who you believed them to be. I had been living inside that grief for 3 weeks. We sat together for a moment in the noise of the coffee shop. People who had both lost something they could not name precisely. Then Claire straightened her spine and looked at me directly. What do I need to do? Talk to Detective Carol Simmons, I said. She is a friend. She will protect you. Under New York law, you cannot be compelled to testify against your husband. That is called spousal privilege. But you have the right to testify voluntarily if you choose to. No one can force you either way. Claire nodded. I choose to. Whatever Derek has done, whatever my father has done, I choose to. She picked up her coffee mug and set it down again without drinking. Harold, I'm sorry. For all of it. I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions sooner. You are asking them now, I said. That is what matters. I called Carol from the parking lot. She answered before the second ring and said, Tell me. Claire Donovan wants to talk to you, I said. And Carol Frank Donovan has done this before. There is a family in Houston from 4 years ago. We need to find them. There was a short silence on the other end. Then Carol said quietly, and with a precision that told me she had shifted into a register I recognized from the recording, the register of someone who had just seen the full shape of a thing. Harold, we are going to need to move faster than I thought. The Millbrook Police Department occupied a 2-story building on Front Street 3 blocks from the village green, with an American flag on the pole out front that someone had put up fresh for the holiday. It was not yet 8 in the morning when I pulled into the parking lot, and the flag was snapping in the July wind with the particular vigor of something new, bright red and white and blue against a sky that had not yet decided what kind of day it intended to be. I sat in the car for a moment looking at it. 31 years ago, Sylvia and I had watched the Millbrook 4th of July parade from the front porch of Birchwood Lane with Derek on my lap, 3 years old, and overwhelmed by the noise of it hiding his face against my shoulder every time a firecracker went off. By the time he was 7, he had stopped hiding. By the time he was 12, he had stopped watching. Somewhere in the years between 3 and 41, the boy who had hidden his face against my shoulder had become the man who sat in my armchair and agreed in a measured voice that his father did not need to be present anymore. I got out of the car and went inside. Carol was waiting in a conference room at the end of the hall, with Arthur Blake seated to her left and Pete Garza to her right. A coffee maker on the credenza behind them was producing the kind of coffee that comes out of institutional machines, thin and slightly burnt, and entirely welcome at 7:50 in the morning after a night without sleep. Carol pushed a cup toward me when I sat down. "TRO came through," Arthur said before I had taken a sip. "Judge Holloway signed it at 6:45 this morning, effective immediately. All transactions involving the Birchwood Lane property are frozen. Meridian Property Group has been notified. The closing scheduled for Friday is dead." I let that settle. The closing. Derek and Frank had been building toward for 8 months the forged signature, the digoxin. The collateral lien, 4 months of emails and meetings, and champagne at Meridian Grill had just been stopped by a judge's signature on a holiday morning. "Do they know yet?" I asked. "Meridian's legal team was notified at 7, Arthur said. "They will notify the parties. Derek and Frank will know by mid-morning. Then we have a narrow window," Carol said. She had a legal pad in front of her and a pen in her hand, and she had the focused economical energy of someone who had already done 2 hours of work before anyone else arrived. "When Derek and Frank learn the closing is blocked, they will panic. Panicked people make mistakes, but they also accelerate. Frank knows the Hargrove deadline is September. With the closing dead, he will push Derek harder to get the POA signed by any means necessary. That recording from yesterday is our evidence of what any means might look like." She looked at me steadily. "We need to bring this to a head before they regroup. I have been thinking about how to do that," I said. Everyone at the table looked at me. "A dinner," I said. "At the house. I invite Derek, tell him I have been thinking about the paperwork he mentioned, that maybe it is time we sat down as a family and talked things through." He will tell Frank. Frank will want to come because he will think it is the opportunity he has been waiting for. Harold, confused and softened, ready to sign in a comfortable setting, with family around him. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup. "I also invite people they do not know are coming for a different reason. Carol, Arthur, Pete, and the neighbors, the pastor from Trinity Church, 2 of my former colleagues from the school district. 15 people total. Witnesses." The room was quiet for a moment. Pete said, "You want to confront them in public." "I want to confront them with witnesses," I said. "There is a difference. A public confrontation gives them room to deny, to perform, to manage the narrative afterward. A room full of people who know me, who knew Sylvia, who will watch it happen and carry it with them, that is something else entirely." Carol set her pen down. "From a legal standpoint, everything you present in that room needs to be evidence already in our possession. You cannot obtain new evidence at the dinner itself, but you can present what we already have in a setting that creates additional witnesses to Derek and Frank's reactions. Reaction evidence is admissible. What they say, what they do, how they respond to being confronted, all of that can be used." She looked at her notepad. "I will be there as a private guest, not in uniform. Pete will be there as a neighbor. Arthur will be there as an old friend. And I will have 2 officers positioned outside the property in plain clothes, ready to move when I signal." "When?" Pete asked. "Sunday," I said. "July 7th, 3 days from now." Arthur nodded slowly. "That gives me time to prepare the quiet title filing on the lien. By Sunday, between the TRO and the lien challenge, Frank's financial position will be significantly more desperate. Desperate men walk into rooms they should not walk into." "There is one more piece," I said. I told them about Claire, the coffee shop in Rhinebeck, her shaking hands, her willingness to testify. I told them about Houston. Carol wrote steadily through all of it, her pen moving without pause. When I finished, Carol looked up. I will reach out to Houston PD today. If Frank has done this before and there is a prior victim, even if charges were never filed, that becomes pattern evidence. It strengthens the conspiracy charge significantly. She tapped her notepad. Claire needs to understand that testifying voluntarily against her husband carries no legal risk to her and significant moral weight to the case. I will talk to her directly. She is ready, I said. She made that clear. We spent another 40 minutes working through the details, the invitation wording, the seating arrangement, which neighbors to call, what time to start. Pete would handle the logistics of the room. Arthur would prepare a summary document of all evidence for Carol to use in the arrest paperwork. Carol would coordinate the officers outside. When we were done, I stood and picked up my coat. Carol walked me to the door of the conference room. She stopped with her hand on the frame and said, "Harold, are you going to be all right this week, 3 more days of this?" I thought about the armchair in my living room. Derek's voice coming out of my laptop speaker at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. A man who is no longer present. I have been managing for 3 weeks, I said. 3 more days is manageable. She nodded. Sylvia would be proud of you, you know. The words hit me somewhere below the sternum, the way her name always did now, with a force that had not diminished in 2 years, and that I suspected never entirely would. I know, I said. That helps more than you might think. I walked back out past the flag on the pole and got in the Buick and sat for a moment with the engine running. Sunday. 3 days. I needed to send an invitation. I pulled out my phone and opened a new message to Derek. Son, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know things have been hard between us lately. I feel like I've been pulling away, and that isn't fair to you. I'd like to have a small dinner on Sunday evening. Just some people I care about to celebrate getting older and not doing it alone. I'd love for you and Claire to come. And if Frank is free, I'd be glad to have him too. Let me know. I read it twice. Every word was precisely chosen. Every word was true in at least one direction. I pressed send. Derek's reply came 4 minutes later. Dad, that sounds wonderful. We'll all be there. Love you. I set the phone on the passenger seat and looked out the windshield at the flag snapping in the July wind. 3 days. I spent the afternoon of July 4th making phone calls. Margaret and Roy Eklund next door, 30 years of borrowed sugar and shared snowblowers, and the particular intimacy of neighbors who have seen each other through enough winters to stop pretending they are strangers. Reverend Thomas Briggs from Trinity Church on Church Street, who had presided at Sylvia's funeral, and who called me every few months to check in with the steady, unassuming persistence of a man who meant it when he said he would. My former colleagues from Millbrook Central School District, Ellen Marsh, who had taught English alongside me for 18 years, Phil Hartley, who had been my department head, and my friend, and who drove up from Poughkeepsie on no notice when Sylvia died, and sat with me in the kitchen until 2 in the morning without once asking me to explain anything. Each call was the same in structure and different in texture. A small dinner on Sunday evening, nothing formal, just some people I care about. I am getting older, and I want to celebrate that with the right people around me. Come at 6. Each person said yes without hesitation, the way people do when they have known you long enough to trust that your invitations mean something. Phil said, Harold, it's about time. You've been too quiet up there. Margaret said, should I bring the coffee cake? Reverend Briggs said, I'll bring my appetite and a prayer if that's all right with you. I told them all yes, and I thanked them. And when I hung up after each call, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand and felt the specific weight of what I was asking them to walk into without their knowledge. They were coming for a dinner. They were going to witness something else entirely. I had wrestled with that, the ethics of it, the fairness, and had concluded that what they were going to witness was the truth, and that there was no version of protecting them from the truth that was actually protection. I called Frank Donovan last. He answered on the second ring, with the smooth, unhurried tone of a man who always answered that way because he had decided long ago that urgency was something that happened to other people. "Harold," he said, "this is a surprise. I hope a good one," I said. "Frank, I'm putting together a small dinner Sunday evening. Derek and Claire will be there. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I'd like to have the people who matter to this family in one room. You've been a big part of Derek's life. I'd be glad to have you." A pause. Brief 2 seconds, maybe 3. I could hear him recalibrating. "I'd be honored, Harold," he said. "Is there anything you need me to bring?" "Oh, just yourself," I said. "Derek mentioned you've been helping him think through some things regarding my finances. Maybe after dinner we can sit down and talk that through. I've been going back and forth on some of those decisions, and I think it's time I stopped putting it off." Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear the shape of his thinking, the closing that had been blocked that morning, the timeline pressure from Hargrove Capital, Harold Webb, apparently softening and opening a door that had been shut for weeks. "That sounds very reasonable, Harold," Frank said, and the warmth in his voice had taken on a different quality. The warmth of a man who has just seen his opportunity materialize. "I'll be there at 6. Looking forward to it," I said. "See you Sunday." I ended the call and set the phone on the kitchen table and looked at Sylvia's bud vase on the windowsill, the small blue one she had bought at a yard sale in Rhinebeck, and that I had kept filled with whatever was growing in the garden, because emptying it felt like surrendering something I was not ready to surrender. He took the bait. He took it immediately and completely, the way a man takes bait when he is hungry enough that caution stops working. The next 2 days passed in a strange double register, outwardly ordinary, inwardly coiled. I cleaned the house on Saturday morning, the way Sylvia used to clean before company came moving through each room, with deliberate attention, straightening what needed straightening, polishing the dining table until it held the light the way she had liked it to. I set 15 places with the good china we had received as wedding gifts and used perhaps a dozen times in 31 years. I placed Sylvia's photograph on the sideboard in the dining room between the candlesticks, not as a statement, simply because she belonged in the room where her family would gather. Pete came by Saturday afternoon to walk through the layout. He stood in the dining room doorway and looked at the table at the sideboard, at the placement of the chairs. "Derek here," he said, pointing to the chair to my right. "Frank here," pointing left. "Claire at the far end between Ellen and Reverend Briggs. Carol at the near end, clear line of sight to both of them." He looked at me. "You need to be at the head. Not the side, not the middle. The head." "I know," I said. He nodded once and left without elaborating. That was the thing about Pete Garza, he understood when words were not the point. Saturday evening, I sat alone at the dining table after dark with a single candle lit and a glass of water I was not drinking. The table was set. The chairs were waiting. The house was very quiet around me. I thought about the last dinner party Sylvia and I had given her 62nd birthday 4 months before she was diagnosed. 20 people crowded into this room with the windows open in September, and Sylvia at the head of the table laughing at something Ellen had said, her hair loose, her earrings catching the candlelight. She had looked across the table at me at some point during the evening and smiled the specific smile she reserved for moments she wanted to remember, and I had smiled back, and neither of us had said anything because we did not need to. I blew out the candle and sat in the dark for a while. Then I went to the spare bedroom, unlocked the filing cabinet, and spent an hour organizing everything into 7 envelopes, white letter-sized, sealed, each one labeled in my own handwriting with a single word on the front. Not the contents. just the word that described what the contents meant. The first envelope I labeled poison, the second theft, the third conspiracy, the fourth forgery, the fifth debt, the sixth murder. The seventh envelope I left blank. I placed all 7 in the inside pocket of the suit jacket hanging on the back of the spare bedroom door, the dark charcoal suit I had worn to Sylvia's funeral and had not worn since. Tomorrow I would wear it again. It seemed right. She had chosen that suit for me. She had said it made me look like a man who knew what he was doing. Tomorrow I intended to be exactly that. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror at 5:50 on Sunday evening, July 7th, adjusting the knot of my tie for the 3rd time, when I understood that I was not nervous. I had expected to be nervous. 3 weeks ago, sitting in Miller's diner with cold coffee and Derek's text message glowing on my phone, I would not have believed that I could arrive at this evening and feel anything other than terror. But what I felt standing in the bathroom, in the charcoal suit Sylvia had chosen, was something closer to stillness. The specific stillness of a person who has done everything that could be done and is now simply waiting for the doing to begin. I straightened the tie one final time, put on the jacket. In the inside breast pocket, I felt the weight of 7 envelopes against my chest. I went downstairs. The dining room looked the way Sylvia would have wanted it to look. The good china on the white tablecloth, the candlesticks lit the late evening light, coming through the west-facing window, in long gold panels across the floor. Her photograph on the sideboard between the candlesticks, watching the room she had filled for 31 years. I stood in the doorway and said quietly to the photograph, "All right, Sylvia, here we go." The first knock came at 6:02. Margaret and Roy Eklund, carrying the coffee cake she had mentioned on the phone. Roy shook my hand and said I looked sharp. Margaret hugged me and said the table was beautiful. I thanked them and meant it. Reverend Briggs arrived at 6:07 and clasped both my hands and said a quiet word of blessing. Ellen Marsh and Phil Hartley came together at 6:12, Phil with a bottle of Finger Lakes Riesling, Ellen immediately moving toward the kitchen to help, despite my telling her not to exactly how she had operated for 22 years. Carol Simmons arrived at 6:15 in a dark blazer, her badge hidden, her eyes moving across the room in a single practiced sweep before she smiled and said she was glad to be there. I introduced her as an old friend of the family. She settled into her chair at the near end of the table and became, to all appearances, simply another guest. Arthur Blake arrived at 6:17 and shook my hand at the door without speaking. That said everything necessary. Claire came at 6:20 alone. She was pale and composed in a way that cost her something. I could see the effort in the set of her jaw. When she took my hand, she held it a moment longer than a greeting required. I said quietly, "You do not have to do this." She said equally quietly, "Yes, I do." I showed her to her seat between Ellen and Reverend Briggs. Derek and Frank arrived together at 6:31. 2 car doors. Footsteps on the flagstone path. Derek's knock. 2 quick raps the same way since he was a teenager. I opened the door. Derek was relaxed, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who believed this evening would end with a signed document and a champagne toast. He hugged me and said, "Dad, the place looks great." I said, "I'm glad you came, son." Both things were true. Neither was the whole truth. Frank came behind him, charcoal suit, silver hair combed, handshake extended, before he had fully cleared the doorway. His eyes moved past me into the dining room, scanning quickly. I watched his gaze find Carol Simmons and move on without recognition. Then find Arthur Blake and pause for exactly half a second before his smile returned unchanged. He had not expected Arthur Blake to be in this room. "Harold," he said, recovering smoothly. What a wonderful thing you've done here. Sylvia would have loved this. She would have, I said. Come in, Frank. We sat down at 7. Phil poured wine. Margaret passed the breadbasket twice. Reverend Briggs offered grace, brief, genuine, received with quiet attention. The conversation around the table was warm and ordinary. Ellen and Claire talked about the garden. Roy and Phil argued pleasantly about the Yankees. Frank asked Reverend Briggs about the church renovation, with the casual interest of someone not remotely interested. Arthur answered everything pleasantly and gave nothing away. Derek leaned toward me at one point and said low, "You seem good tonight, Dad. Really good." "I've been feeling clearer lately," I said. Something moved across his face, gone before it fully formed. At 7:45, I set down my fork, picked up my wine glass, and let the small clink bring the conversation to a close. 15 faces turned toward me. I reached into my breast pocket and placed the first white envelope on the table. "I want to tell you all a story," I said. "It begins on Father's Day morning, and it begins with a text message." Derek's eyes went to the envelope, then to my face. "Dad," he said carefully. "What is this, Ma?" "This," I said, "is the truth, and it has been waiting long enough. Before I reveal this brutal final confrontation, please comment "Showdown," so I know you're still here with me. Also, please note the following events contain some fictionalized details added for dramatic effect. If this makes you uncomfortable, or if you do not wish to keep listening, you may turn off the video right here. I opened the first envelope and placed the toxicology report in front of Derek. One line highlighted in yellow. Digoxin. Confirmed present. For 3 months, I was dizzy, exhausted, and losing my memory, I said. 2 doctors told me it was grief. It was not grief. It was a prescription cardiac drug administered to me without my knowledge in doses small enough to avoid detection, large enough to make me appear mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. I looked at my son. I watched you add it to my orange juice on the morning of June 17th. I did not drink it. I had it tested. Derek's face went white. His hands pressed flat against the table. Dad, that is not... Sit down, Derek. He sat. The second envelope held the photograph of the power of attorney document from his briefcase and the handwritten note beneath it. Frank POA done this week. House signs Friday. Don't tell Claire. This was in your briefcase on June 16th, I said to Derek. Then I turned to Frank. It transfers full legal authority over my property and accounts to your son-in-law. I did not request it. I did not authorize it. I have never signed it. Frank said nothing. He was watching me with the focused stillness of a man running calculations. The third envelope held the email chain. 4 months of correspondence. I read one line aloud without inflection. The old man trusts me completely. He's been lonely since Mom died. I just need to keep showing up. I set the page down. That is my son's strategy in his own words. Margaret Eklund made a sound, not a word, just a breath. Roy covered her hand with his. The fourth envelope held Pete Garza's documentation of the forged signature on the Meridian Property Group sale agreement, my name signed by someone else on a contract to sell my home for $1,380,000. The closing was scheduled for July 5th, I said. It was blocked by a temporary restraining order from Dutchess County Supreme Court. Derek lurched to his feet. You had no right. Sit down. Arthur Blake's voice quiet and immovable from the end of the table. Derek sat. His breathing filled the room. The fifth envelope documented Frank's fraudulent collateral lien, my home pledged as security for his $4 million development loan, without my signature, without my knowledge, 8 months ago. You were running two schemes against the same property simultaneously, I said to Frank. I imagine that seemed efficient. I want an attorney, Frank said. You are going to need one. I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. Derek's voice. Then Frank's. The 4-second pause. Then a man who is no longer present. The estate moves through a different channel. Then Derek, quiet and clear, I understand. 47 seconds. When it ended, the room was so still I could hear the candles. Margaret had both hands over her mouth. Reverend Briggs bowed his head. Ellen gripped Phil's arm and stared at Derek. Roy had not moved since the recording began. Derek's head dropped into his hands. His shoulders shook once, then went still. Frank stared at the phone as if it had no right to exist. The 7th envelope, I said, is empty. Claire Donovan stood up. Her voice was steady, at a cost I understood completely. My name is Claire Donovan. I am Derek's wife and Frank's daughter. I heard your phone call, Dad. All of it. And I will not pretend I didn't. Frank looked away from his daughter. Carol Simmons' rose badge visible. Derek Webb. Frank Donovan, you are both under arrest. She read the charges. The 2 officers came through the front door. Derek turned to me before they let him out. His mouth opened. Nothing came. I looked at my son and felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just the specific, permanent peace of a man who has done what needed to be done. The door closed at 8:53 p.m. The dining room was very quiet. 4 months passed. The way months pass after something that has broken the world into a before and an after, not quickly, not slowly, but with a kind of relentless forward movement that does not ask your permission. I sat in the front row of courtroom 4B at the Dutchess County Courthouse in Poughkeepsie on a Tuesday morning in November, with Arthur Blake to my left and Carol Simmons 2 rows behind me, and I listened to a judge pronounce the words that completed what had begun at Miller's Diner on Father's Day morning. Derek Michael Webb. Guilty on all counts. 18 years, New York State Department of Corrections. Minimum 12 years before parole eligibility. Frank James Donovan. Guilty on all counts. 12 years. Minimum 8 before parole eligibility. The Birchwood Lane property. Full title restored to Harold James Webb, all liens vacated under quiet title judgment. Civil restitution ordered $500,000 to be satisfied from the liquidation of defendant assets. The gavel came down. I did not stand up immediately. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and looked at the bench where the judge had already turned away. And I thought about a kitchen on a Sunday morning in June, and a glass of orange juice and a vial the size of a travel bottle, and 15 seconds of a man's hands doing something unforgivable while his father stood outside the door and watched. Arthur touched my shoulder. It's done, Harold. I nodded. I looked up at the courtroom ceiling, high, institutional, indifferent, and said nothing out loud, but felt moving through me like something released after very long confinement, the word Sylvia had written in her last letter. Done. Outside on the courthouse steps, Carol shook my hand and said, "What happens now?" I looked out over Poughkeepsie in November, gray sky, bare trees, the ordinary world continuing its ordinary business. Now, I said, I have something to build. January in Montauk is no one's idea of a vacation. The parking lot at the Point was nearly empty when I arrived Thursday morning. The sky flat white, the Atlantic driving hard against the rocks below the lighthouse with the force of something that has been doing this forever and will continue long after everyone standing on this overlook is gone. I had driven out from Millbrook the night before, slept in a motel on Old Montauk Highway, woken before dawn, and come here because Sylvia had wanted to for 15 years, and we had never managed it. Every summer we said this year. Every summer something intervened. After she got sick, we stopped saying it out loud. But she had written it in the journal I found behind the painting in June, a single line between a garden note and a recipe. Montauk. We still have to go. I was here now. For both of us. My phone buzzed. An email from an address I did not recognize, the kind of account a person creates when they are not certain who they are reaching out to. Subject line: I read about you. I need help. My name is Walter, 71 years old, Rochester, New York. My daughter has been managing my finances, and I kept telling myself it was because she loves me. Last week I found documents I was not supposed to find. I don't know who else to contact. I found your name through Sylvia's legacy fund. I'm sorry to bother you. The wind pushed against my coat. The lighthouse stood behind me, no opinion, no comfort, simply present. I typed back, standing on the overlook. Walter, you are not bothering me. You are exactly who this fund exists for. Call me. We will figure this out together. You are not alone. Harold Webb. I sent it and put the phone away. The waves kept coming. Each one spent completely against the rocks. Each one replaced without pause. I thought about Sylvia's letter. Fight. Not for the house, not for the money. I had fought. I had built something from what remained. That was enough. I turned away from the water and walked back to the car. There was work to do. If this grandpa story from New York has taught me anything, it is this: the people closest to you are not always the safest people in your life. I learned that the hard way at 65 years old, in the house I built with my own hands, and the woman I loved for 31 years. Don't be like I was. Don't let loneliness make you blind. Don't let love make you careless with the evidence right in front of you. I ignored 3 months of my own body telling me something was wrong, because I trusted the person handing me the glass. Trust is not weakness, but trust without attention will cost you everything. God gave Sylvia the wisdom to protect me before she was gone. I did not deserve that kind of love. I am still learning how to honor it. My personal belief is simple. A family story worth telling is one where the truth wins, not the loudest voice, not the most powerful lawyer, not the person with the most to gain. Just the truth, patient and permanent, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. This has been One Old Man's Family Story from New York. There are more grandpa stories like this one, stories of ordinary people in this city who refuse to disappear quietly. If this family story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. These stories need witnesses. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you know. One final note. The stories ahead contain fictionalized elements crafted for educational purposes. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what serves you best, and take good care of yourself.